In case you didn't know it already, the system is sick and it's time to start letting humans feel again. Today I'm talking with Aurora Leigh, a wellness anthropologist and educator around systems and power. We ask the simple but inconvenient question: if disconnection is the root of our mental health and addiction crisis, then why are we still treating the symptoms and calling it care? We feed off of that question into a bunch of different topics that all challenge the common narrative. And so if you've ever felt like you are always made out to be the problem, but there was something missing, maybe it was the sick system. And this one's for you. Sit back and enjoy this episode, and I hope you take a lot from it. Dysfunction is everywhere. In our families, in our cultures, and in our systems. And this is Dysfunctional, the podcast that helps you name the things that most people can't or won't see. Let's call it out, break it down, and maybe even start a bloody revolution. So, Aurora, I'm very excited for this conversation. How are you doing today?
I'm well, thanks. I think I'm about 8 hours behind you, so it's nice and early here in Canada.
Yeah, nice and early in the morning. And for me, it's towards the back end of the day. So we'll see how our energy mixes up. But listen, let's get straight into it. Why don't you, for the people listening, just tell us a little bit about who you are in the world today and how you came to be that person?
Oh, wow. Who I am in the world today. Well, then that means I'm not my titles, because who I am is who I am. So, I'm just a heart
Give us
center.
both. We'll
Okay.
have both.
Okay. Who I am, I'm a heart-centered human, and that shows up in many forms. So I'm a mom first and a dog mom. I am a musician, so I'm a singer-songwriter, but I did that after I did my degree in medical anthropology and cultural anthropology as a way of connecting, human connection. And I also am an educator, so I educate in healthcare, but I'm also educating in my own side business with a knowledge translation company. I researched very heavily around what kind of modern society is doing related to wellness. So I call myself a wellness anthropologist.
Okay. And what's all of that born out of? Why have you found yourself? Why have you found yourself here?
Oh, wow. Okay, well, I feel that I was naturally with a lens of anthropology without knowing it. So when I found anthropology, I thought, wow, I already think like this. It felt so fulfilling to my soul, because the
hmm
lens for anthropology is really that bird's eye perspective looking at humanity. Well,
Can you just quickly, before you go on, can you just explain what anthropology is in case anybody doesn't know?
of course, it was the study of humans through all time and space. And from that, you'll find linguistics, you'll find archaeology, but you'll also find cultural anthropologists, medical anthropologists, and the
Okay.
such. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Great.
So if I was to study modern society in an anthropological lens, I would be looking at the dynamics, the behavioral patterns, why we do what we do, what social constructs got us to that place. So when you ask what led me to that, I had actually had an upbringing homeschooled outside of a city, outside of a town. You could only get there by boat or plane. So as a little girl, I was very inquisitive and in wonder of what it was that communities were doing, what it was that was happening when I did get like exposure to some TV shows or magazines when we'd go to town, things like that. But I also had very high IQ and gift. They call it giftedness or whatever you call it. Doesn't matter. We're all gifted. But I love to take in books and writing. And so my brain was always inquisitive about the popular culture. So in my perspective, I didn't get the conditioning of popular culture. I was always on the outside of. And so I still feel that in my inner child, in my wonder, curious mind. And I like to treasure that curious mind and keep it. And so when I found anthropology, I wanted to be a midwife. I loved the art and the beauty of women loving women and that kind of traditional practice. And so I went to university to become a midwife. And then I found anthropology on my way to getting into that program. And I just stayed with it because I think that's the direction I was, meant to go.
Yeah, so you sort of it feels like you were called to it more than anything from what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I had this inquisitive question, like, why are people suffering? I grew up northern BC. There's a lot of violence. There's a lot of trauma. There's so much so that maybe you don't even talk about trauma yet or healing yet. And so I had, once I had come to town, I saw a lot of human suffering and I didn't really understand it. Or I saw a lot of conflicts and I didn't understand the cause of those conflicts or those lineage belief patterns, family system belief patterns. I didn't quite understand why. And so I had this seeking. It was that seeker in me that when I found anthropology, it answered so many questions. But near the end of my degree, I started getting frustrated because I thought, okay, so we have all the research. So why are people still suffering then? It
Mm.
are scholars just staying in their ivory towers just so they converse with themselves? Because if the research is there, then it should be actually embedding and making solutions in society. And so then that,
What did the research tell us then? What did the research say?
well, everything from do we have 3 episodes?
Let's go. Let's go.
Yeah. Everything from health studies to psychology to anthropology to indigenous studies. I think that decolonizing some of our thought constructs is healthy too. Looking at the power, you could save yourself. You could save yourself 5 years. And honestly, I dug into interdisciplinary everything, and it all comes down to kindness. Like
Mm,
in a society, kindness to self, kindness to others, and kindness to our environment. So when we deviate from that, quite literally, we were obviously going to get symptomologies. And then our society deals with that smoke, the symptomologies, rather than actually the cause, which would be human connection and love. And here in
mm,
Canada, in the spaces that I have been with mental health, addictions, suicide, and looking at, you know, the core aspect of how that can be resolved, if you want to call it that, um, is love and connection, the wiring for love and connection that's so needed. But how do we embed that in our social frameworks? That's the next question.
mm. And so you don't believe that it is embedded in our
No,
social networks?
no. Do you think that value is there?
Do I think the value's there? Are you asking?
Yeah. Does the public school system allow for love and connection? Or
No,
even
absolutely not.
daycares is, we drop our kids off at daycare and caregivers aren't allowed to love on the children, right?
Yeah. No, I actually think we're built, if you're asking me the question, I think society is built for the opposite now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like everything lacks love and connection. And actually, I feel like we've created a materialistic like way of looking at stuff. So love and connection is feels like something that can't sort of be measured or counted, and so it counts for absolutely
Right.
nothing in what we implement because you can't measure it. And if
That's
you can't see it as a physical thing,
mm-hmm.
then it won't get implemented within our society. That's
Yeah.
how I feel.
Quantitative, data driven research to legitimize where we're funding and what we're funding, right? Rather than that qualitative piece. And social sciences is all around that qualitative piece. So why aren't we drawing more on that research that we know has been legitimized, right? Like, there's the Roseto effect. That's a powerful one that I learned in health studies, where there was a town in the United States that a lot of immigrants from Italy had gone there, and they couldn't figure out why there was no heart disease and there weren't these other elements that the rest of the United States was having. And all they could determine then was that how they treated each other in an egalitarian way was the cause of their positive health outcomes. And it's the same, those countries that are the most equal in our society have the highest health outcomes because people aren't treated less than. That superiority gaze or that am I enough kind of thing really puts down our immune system or whatever everything else that our beliefs kind of create within our system and our nervous systems. I think is huge. So social safety, or do we feel socially safe within the society that we're in? We're social mammals. We have to have those pillars of safety, of protection, of love in order to be open, curious, connected in our nervous system. So that's how simple it is, right? If we were to be fully attuned, connected, love with self and with others, we would be curious, open, and connected. but we need to feel safe, loved, and protected in order for that to be possible.
That feels like it's lacking in. I'm in the UK, you're in Canada, in America. When we look at those three countries, like if I'm calling them the West, it feels like those values that you just talked about are not.
Hmm.
I mean, they feel like they couldn't be further away. Are there, and you might not be able to answer this, but are there any like real living examples of places today where they're closer to that, where we can quantify in any way that they're closer to that?
Well, all I can say is I know that Sweden and Japan are the healthiest countries, right? And Norway's pretty close too. So I would say that looking at those values that they have there.
What? Sorry, they're like the healthiest. What, emotionally or in general?
Yeah, well, it's all connected. It's not separate, hey?
Yeah, but when we try and measure it, right? I'm trying to
Right.
think through the Western lens, but
Measuring.
we've got like there's data is there to show that they're the healthiest.
Yep.
What do we put that down to, or what has that been
What did they
explored?
put it down to? The
Yeah.
egalitarian values, the way that people are treated, the way that everyone's treated equally. So we look at equity and equality, and the more equal a country, the more healthy.
Oh, so I feel like in more recent years, and probably since COVID, it's been exasperated, but the gap
Mhm.
between the like what everybody calls the top
Yeah.
1%, that gap is seems to be getting bigger and
Mhm.
bigger and bigger. And so do you feel like that could be one of the main causes of the distress that we're seeing in a lot of people, or one of the big
I think it's
causes?
a contributing factor, a huge one, because we're social mammals, like I said. We have to
Yeah,
feel primally safe. So it would be very, very valid for people to know that, well, my Maslow's hierarchy of needs, my safety and security. It's people are two mortgage payments away or two rent payments away of being homeless. People feel that
yeah,
in their nervous system.
yeah. Do you think that's why it's not talked about? Because ultimately, what we're calling the mental health problem in a lot of places now is actually not a mental health problem, it's a social issue.
I think that social determinants of health are a main factor, but then also our ability to feel emotion, our ability to turn towards each other when someone has a lot of emotion, and that it's safe to feel emotion and that there's no shame in feeling emotion. And just like how water kind of runs through a river, right? It's clear. We're the
Mm,
same way. We need to have that running fluid, what is real, what is with us. If there's a righteous way of feeling anger, despair, sadness, grief, those are valid, very valid feelings. They need to run through and be heard and witnessed and not gaslit, right? They need to be seen and witness each other. We're a very unwell society. So, how do we get well if the norm that's allowed us to be unwell is what keeps being put back as how we should be behaving? When really, probably the people who are not okay with it are the ones who are actually more well, more apt, and more responsive to what the reality is.
yeah, I hear that totally, right? It's like almost like the people that feel the most unwell in our current society are probably the most well because they're not being able to
Yeah.
deal with, yeah. How do you feel? How do you think we got, or do you have any thoughts on how we got so far away from that? If you're talking about that
Yeah.
kind of energy being able to run through us, to be able to feel safe, to be able to express that, how as a culture have we got so far away from that?
Well, stoicism is that belief that we have to just be well kept in order to be professional, in order to be well received, in order to be enough, in order to be demonstrative of success. Those belief systems really came through, the British Empire and kind of those colonial values and the Catholic system, right? And what is suppressed and seen as not human. We have to be the glory of God through this kind of perspective of what's known as regal and okay, and the condemnation if you're not. And so there's so many elements to that, religion and politics. And really, I know here in Canada, our basis of politics is built off of religion. And same with a lot of the violence and trauma that's happened here has been due to the efforts of the Catholic Church to disrupt and dismantle anything that is human centered based that isn't of the church, right? And so that trauma that comes with that. But then the fear and the policing of people, where if a child has an outburst in class, maybe they have something really awful going on at home. So that's valid. They have so much going on in their nervous system. Now they're learning to shut down and suppress and avoid, and they're learning they're wrong and bad to express that emotion. And I'm not supposed to talk about what happened. And so there's so much fear and locked away from our voice. And the voice is so important. It's the window to our soul. It's our literally our expression of our being. And so if that's even clamped a little bit, that's going to cause disruption. But if it's clamped a lot due to fear, violence, shame, sexual abuse, trauma, you know, if you talk about it, there's going to be punishment, that kind of thing. Well, it's going to be hardwired to be obedient. And it's really hard to unwire a fear-based obedient mind that's ingrained at such a young age. It's autonomic, right? So freeze, fawn, fight, flight, all these aspects that are coming up that people have now normalized as behaviors. So a person who starts to unthaw may not know how to process and understand that right away, right? It's like the iceberg's unfreezing. We want that freeze to unthaw and a person not to live shut down and hopeless or despair. That's a good thing, but it still has to be done in a safe environment. So if they're not being validated in a loving, supportive, nurturing way, it's likely that they're going to reclamp down until they get used to it, or they have a tribe around them that can legitimize and they feel that that's right. Or maybe they need to take more time to themselves as they're healing and find a new space that is more safe, psychologically safe, emotionally safe, and nurturing for that. But also the knowledge, it's really good to have a bit, I believe it's good to have a bit more knowledge around the autonomic nervous system, some somatic techniques, listening to people's channels like yours and others, like reading books, getting that knowledge too, so that when it happens and you're stuck in a freeze response because someone that you were feeling very vulnerable in your healing journey, and someone comes in that might restrike something in your vagus nerve, and you're in an inflammation state now, and now you're frozen, you can understand it. So you can be the observer of that freeze. And so that, we're going to need to have that to actually unthaw some of the effects of that stoicism that I said was a core reason. And I know I can only really speak for some of what I'm looking at within North America and not in the context that I would be familiar with where you are. But um, after the Great Depression and after World War II, we didn't know what PTSD was, right? And so people came back from the war and they were highly triggerable, emotional. So that walking on eggshells type thing that would happen. And then alcoholism is the same, right? With the walking on eggshells, you get ingrained with walking on eggshells. Don't trigger someone, don't have big emotions. But then add in this kind of collective trauma of insane asylums or what have you, where people would get thrown in and deemed crazy for having valid kind of big responses for whatever they were going through. And so there's also been this kind of deep, I think, collective subconscious fear of that ever happening again, because epigenetics is real. We remember what our ancestors went through. So depending what your ancestors went through, there's likely a fear of suppression, or a fear connecting to suppression that is the cause of why it's so very scary to feel again, to dance, to be free, to go, hey, this isn't okay, but also in your life too, perhaps.
Yeah, because it feels like, and thank you for sharing that. There's a lot in there that I do want to try and pick apart. Because, by the way, when you actually take and list everything that you've just said, it does, you go, wow, there's a lot. If you take like the hangover from sort of Catholicism running, being the power. So there's like this real staunch kind of shame around like doing bad stuff or making mistakes or being wrong. And then the like colonization that I think still goes on in the mind. I think the West is still colonizing the rest of the world as much as it can, but it's doing it through the mind now. What I mean by that is like,
Yeah.
we're not invading countries on foot, but we're just invading them in how they view and see things. We think that we are the superior. We still believe that we're the superior, right? And I think you see that in wellness techniques even, right? We poo-pooed and rubbished things like meditation for such a long time, and now we've brought them back in the West as if we just made them up and as if they hadn't been existing around the world forever, right? And we've sort of stole them. So I see that going on, and then this epigenetic stuff, this kind of hangover from some of the, and again, like you look at like the stuff that happened after, like post-war, where there was a lot of, like you said, walking on eggshells, coming back, people that were like highly triggerable. So there's that hangover. But then when you talk about the asylums and locking people up and calling them mental, I feel like that's still going on, although we might not lock them up anymore, right? There's still this, like, I would call it chronic pathologization of people that express emotion, because it's now, and I wonder if you can speak to this, but I feel like it is now normal, quote unquote normal. You are normal if you don't emotionally express. If you're somebody that stays on an even keel and doesn't express any big emotions, you're considered normal today in today's society. And so anybody that exists outside of that framework is considered at some level to be a bit crazy, right? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think that's the huge disconnect, right? Because to actually
Yeah.
be healthy is to be attuned to what's real. And it would be very actually valid for us to be responding to the world in a certain way, wouldn't it?
And what do you think would be the most valid way to be responding to the world right now?
I think that gathering I mean, in a positive solution focused lens would be to be gathering together and finding shared values that our society can steer towards again. So, after World War II, and this is around the world, right? But in North America, we got this whole all American dream, and I think that all American dream did spread. Of this is what you should attain as a human being. This is what you should strive for as a human being. The whole your own house and two cars and very isolated and individualized life that does really well in a capitalistic society's kind of model of what you should be doing to be productive citizens. So this idea of being enough is being this productive citizen, right? In this
Mm,
kind of cultural model. And if you don't fit in that model, then you're not okay. You're not valued in our society. But I think, that was a choice. So anytime, across any human kind of civilization, and Margaret Mead said, this anthropologist said that, the way that she could tell a society had formed or had created a civilization was there was telltale signs of compassion, right? And I
mm,
think that has been shared a bit, and it's very valid, right? But if we have a civilization that's choosing what it values, every civilization has chosen their values. We can re-choose our values. We can unlearn and relearn because those values have not been working, right? And
mm,
so if we were to actually have a healthy response, maybe there's anger, there's a grief, there's a whole, like if you were to go through the grief cycles, sadness, anger, denial, bargaining, I think people are in a collective grief, and that's super valid. And then
mm,
if we were to get to the acceptance, okay, that's what's truly going on here. This is what's happening, then that's our leverage point where we can have self-determination. That's our power point, right? But until we do the grief of going, okay, we have to grieve that we have an unwell society. This is a fact. So now what? And that's the power
mm,
point. So what do we want? And who is it? How can we gather the voices to go, okay, what are those shared values that we do want to be steering our society? Because it's always a choice.
mm. But how do we get there? How can we even begin to start to do that, to start to bring that in? I know that's a massive question. I'm asking you,
Crisis
like,
leads to transformation, right? And so I think that COVID was a start where the world shut down. Quite literally, the world shut down. And then, with the bear cave kind of analogy, people went into their bear cave. And in that bear
mm,
cave, maybe people started to need to feel, or maybe they had less pressures of performing, so they could finally take the mask off. But when they took the mask off, rates of domestic violence went up, rates of suicide went up, everything went up. Even car crashes, they tripled where I am. things like that when they were on the roads again afterwards, because
Wow.
the nervous system could finally release. We have such a burnout culture, right, of survival from that. Like we've got to just keep moving forward. People aren't living and thriving in their nervous system. They're living in survival. So we shut down. Now it's in this like rest and repair state, right? And people could actually feel. So we have started to some level where people are more connected, but I think they're still looking outside for the social messaging. And I think that the
Mm,
social messaging is huge. So when you have your podcast and you're getting messages out there, it's so important, you know, but we
mm,
also need, I believe that we would need it from the top down. Like I spoke to 100 policymakers here in Canada for public health about the ACE study, adverse childhood experiences, and not one of them had heard of it. And so the
wow.
hearts and minds of folks of how they're connecting to the work they're doing, but it's like a waterfall, and it does need to be kind of, I think it needs to be rejuvenated at that level so that it does trickle down. Because I spent some time kind of in every field, whether it was family services with people who, you know, would never get their kids back, but really supporting relationship repair and life skills for youth that wouldn't have their parents. I've spent time with women stopping the violence counseling. I've spent time with youth mental health and addictions counseling. I've spent time kind of in the college level trying to help support the repairs between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples in the curriculum for faculty. And now I'm in healthcare with some of those same kind of repairs and cultural safety measures as well for better health outcomes. So I've tried to see kind of the different spaces through my lens of anthropology. This is all still my research, even as I'm just working in the pockets. It's
Yeah.
I'm researching really, right? And seeing the efforts. And I think that still we need it at that level of policy, where when people are making big decisions that they can come from an informed space, and that's just not there yet. There isn't a shared understanding yet. And
Mm.
I think this work that you're doing of anti-pathologizing is huge. We need to have an entire new way of seeing mental health, and that's exactly what you're putting out there, which is very beautiful and amazing.
Yeah. Well, thank you. You know, because for that was born out of like, and I want to get into this a little bit actually, if we can.
Yay.
My own experience of when I first started trying to seek help, and the only place I could really seek help for the ways that I felt was like through medical ways, right? Going to doctors and stuff like that. And so they would just only ever pathologize my
Mhm.
distress, right? And my kind of like the short way of telling you my story is that I found a charity that supports children of alcoholics, and it changed my life because I was like, hang on a minute, this all makes sense now. Like I've been like how I've been reacting isn't like some sort of fucking chemical imbalance or some sort of another label that I need. I've been reacting to the world exactly as I should have been based on my experiences. And so in some of the first question I want to ask is like, what's some of the main trauma, if we call it that, that you see in young people, generally speaking, that maybe people are not talking about, or that people don't seem to see when you're working with these families or with these young people that are in care and stuff like that? What's the most common trauma?
Yeah. So, sexual trauma is kind of what you see is the root of everything, and it's so untalked about and untreated at the source, and it has a very particular way of needing to be treated, with very safe measures in mind. Um, and it's something that when you look at problematic youth, I don't like that term at all, but um, just for associations purposes, problematic youth. Um, if you look at their lifeline and where they go, maybe incarceration rates, and it follows their lifeline if they don't have that, you know, powerful moment where you self-validated, or a huge mentor in their life, that one person that's like, hey, I believe in you, I know you're just in pain. They don't have that person, and they don't find those other healing methods. they go down that, and the core is usually that physical violence and sexual trauma piece, right? And so they had a right reason to at one point, split internally, or what, Gabor Mate says, it's not trauma unless it happens kind of internally, right? And so it's that experience of how do they find their soul and their spirit back after that. And if you don't have a society that understands and acknowledges, they can't get that piece of them back. They can't come present in their consciousness again. They have split off. And the reason people split off so much, especially with sexual trauma, is that it's just so revolting, and children know, and it's so harmful, and our society's so scared to talk about it, but it's so necessary. If the government funded, sexual healing centers, um, they would have, the statistics would come down.
And I believe that most people think, maybe not necessarily the listeners of this podcast, but if I was to take a general selection of Western society and ask them how often, like how common do you think sexual trauma is to young people, I would imagine most of them would think that it's really rare.
Right, because we can't talk about it. And so when a child hears that, they actually think they're wrong and bad, right? And so before they're old enough and their brain's old enough to understand that they're separate from that abuser, they're separate from that caregiver that's not keeping them safe, they think they're enmeshed still, right? Because it's natural to be enmeshed until we're at a certain stage of development. So all they know is that it's super bad. So then they internalize that they're super bad, right? And so then I'm told I can't talk about this. So all they know is all of this confusing feeling of shame, disgust, emotion, I'm bad and wrong. And they keep that because, and research in the data has shown now that our nervous systems as a child, still as adults, we just got bigger, right? And so if that nervous system is so terrified of talking, you're not going to talk, you're going to have to pass through some really hard stuff before you can share, because you're still going to feel like something really bad is going to happen if you share, even though now you're an adult and it won't. There's also been that kind of belief system, and I've heard it from folks from the church, like if that happened to you, it was somehow your fault. It's that old ideology of blame the person for being the tempter, right? Or something like that. It's very sick and an unwell belief system for sure. Of course, it's not a child's fault, but that belief is also a really old, stuck on one that is just not true, right? And so for people to feel like, okay, it's safe to share this and to have that community support and togetherness through that, that's really important. But it's starting slowly, right? Because those are big emotions and sensations. You wouldn't want to just rupture and open it all at once. It's all about safety and nurturing first your inner child, and listening to yourself first, and learning how to validate yourself first. And then maybe it's through creativity that you would start to express it out and see how your system wants to express it out naturally. Like for me, it was through music. Um, I I felt safe enough to get it out through song, and then it became my story rather than like writing everything out that I'd been through in my childhood. It just came out in song, but it was also something that could connect, and we move into music more than we do just someone talking about it. And so I think safety has to be put up for people to be able to talk about it. But it is the core reason. If we don't treat the fire, we're just going to keep having the smoke, kind of in our society.
So you have your own experience of trauma?
Yeah, I do. If you know the ACE study, I had a 9 out of a 10. And so for myself, there was a lot of domestic violence growing up, different, multiple dads. And my core was, those young, impressionable ages that, and the person that abused me was a member of the police, like a high member of the police here. And so when I was 28 and I became ready to learn and to go deep after my undergrad, I was like, oh, I was freed up in my capacity where I could go there. And I had ceremonies and different healing things that helped bring that out too. And yeah, I took him to court, and I went through that whole process, because if I was, connecting with women, I needed to walk that too. And I do understand why it's so hard for people to come forward, because the court system is again built off of pathologizing, gaslighting. It's not a healing space to come for truth
No.
and justice. And yeah.
Did he get done for it? Did he get found guilty for it?
Well, so he had a peace bond put on him. We were going to Supreme Court with a jury, and I think that it's the old boys club or whatever with the police
What's a,
force, right?
what's a what's a peace bond?
A peace bond just means they're not allowed to talk to you for a year, which we hadn't talked for decades. But he had to say, yes, she has a right to fear me. She has a reason to fear me. So he did have to admit that. But just think about this for a second. So because the police detachment was where some of my abuse happened, was in that detachment, that's also where I full circle went back to do my statement decades later. So I got to relive, like I got to feel the trauma, but knowingly know what was going on for me, and then
Mm.
work through it. And then afterwards, like the people were so lovely that ended up supporting and trauma informed. I asked for trauma informed, because that's the other thing, is knowing that you can ask for that and that it's very valid. And they were so great and really supportive and understanding, but that's because they had the knowledge, and that's so important.
Mm.
You don't get that experience if you get people who aren't familiar or understanding. But they allowed me to even do a ceremony there, and they actually ended up tearing that one down and rebuilding a new one. So that was also really healing. And but no,
Wow.
he's still out there, but he's retired. And we got an official apology though from the national police force. We call it the RCMP here, Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And I got them to also write in their apology to my family, not just me. So I got an official apology, and so that was also healing for them. So that truth is very healing, but it's also hard, right? And
Yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of going, like, the fear of, I guess, going through that for a lot of people is what keeps them stuck, because they're never supported to a place where they feel like they can walk through the fire, right?
yeah, and I think that's where social community healing spaces need to be present. This whole idea of just one-on-one with your counselor, that's good for what it's good for, but we also need, I think, social spaces. So someone who's not ready, they can witness someone sharing, right? They can go, okay, when I'm ready, I will. Wow, that's so brave. Wow, when they share they're loved, okay, this will be okay. It's going to be okay to share. And how about sharing for the purposes of healing, and not trust the government to be the one to decide, is this perpetrator actually a perpetrator? Because that can be quite taxing, like very tolling on them,
Mm.
right? Because you're just there, and their lawyer, the only defense they have is to make you out to be crazy. That's their only
Yeah.
defense, is to break down your character, which is very abusive.
Mm. So you feel like the solution to a lot of this is like community healing spaces?
Yeah, that's why I started my music stuff, because I think making it really safe to kind of, okay, here's a song, it feels safe, but now getting everyone to talk and share. I did that. I've done that a few times, and people will open up and talk and share. And because there's different wiring in our brain that's for social aspects, right? And that can help heal that social part of feeling safe in society.
Yeah, because that safety piece is like so important, right?
Mhm.
Do you feel like one of the things that I talk a lot about, and I've had a lot of different guests on that to explore this, is I get a sense that a lot of traumatized people that have been abused in some way or another uh, end up being pathologized and just being told that there's a
Medication.
problem. Yeah, there's a problem in you. There's something wrong with you. We'll give you this term that helps you with it. It normally ends in disorder of some kind. And I'm not saying that all people that end up with a diagnosis are this, right? But as far as I can see, so many people, uh, particularly women, I think historically, um, end up with a diagnosis when actually what they need is support to face what they've experienced.
Yeah, absolutely. So the head of psychology at the university I went to, the University of British Columbia, he said if you go in to see any psychologist, you're going to get a diagnosis. But there's
Yeah,
it was 7 billion then, but there's 8 billion consciousnesses. Not one consciousness is the same, right?
yeah,
And so this idea of standardization or symptoms, you're going to find yourself, oh, do you sometimes get a little anxious? Well, yeah, that's pretty valid. Do you see how busy it is out there with flying cars like everywhere?
yeah,
Of course,
yeah,
you're going to have an elevated heart rate a little bit, right? Like there's just so many things. Or what about moms or dads like alone in this individualized world raising their kids, and now they're in bed, and now like the children are in bed, and now what, right? Everyone's separate from one another. That's also not natural. There's so many
mm,
people who are from more communal countries and cultures, and they'll come to like North America or the way or the that individualized society, and they're like, it's so depressing, like you're all so disconnected and you don't touch each other, like you literally, it's not in the social norm to like connect and touch and everything. And so they just move back home because they just find us so depressing. And it's valid
yeah,
though. They're valid. They're the ones that are valid. But
yeah.
back to your question, yeah. So I went through a lot of stuff. I got mislabeled when I was young, but I was being fed like, tell the doctors this, tell them this, to kind of muffle the abuse I was going through. This is very much something that I have deeply connected and released any shame or doubt around, but it's helped me to have all of the knowledge to validate. A lot of people don't have that, and they feel maybe it is me, maybe I am wrong and bad. And so it's part of that abuse cycle, and our medical system is part of that abuse cycle. So
Mm,
when you look at, domestic violence or abuse cycles that happen, right, there's that kind of glorification phase of like love and bonding and trust and dopamine and all of that that creates that trauma bond. And people will often feel trauma bonded still to their abuser, but then they're having all these symptoms, so they more readily accept the diagnosis because they're not going to say that they're wrong. They're not willing to know deep in their heart and mind that that person is actually wrong for what they've done, because
mm,
they'll still be that protective piece that comes where the victim often will subconsciously protect out of even a survival mechanism of fawning, right? And so abuse is really hard for childhood um, years, but it also happens for adults as well. If all of a sudden they're in a domestic violence situation that they've never been in before, they don't understand what's going on with them. Their partner could be gaslighting and telling them that they're the ones going crazy, and they believe it too. It's so they go in and they self-assess and they say, well, this is going on, and they get a depressed antidepressants, they get all kinds of things. I've supported people where they have really valid reasons to be not okay right now, like whether their husband's dying or their kids, are going through some awful stuff, and they say, I don't feel well. And that the only thing doctors are trained in is to go, okay, for this set of symptoms we have the solution. And pharmaceuticals have made a huge profit off of this lie or this fallacy that chemical imbalance is for sure. It's a theory. It's always been a theory. It's never been proven, right? But they sure market it like it's for sure, And so it's not, though. When we
mm.
look at cultural associations, I associate this monitor because I've learned through my culture what this shape means, right? This is my medical anthropology 101, right? So we apply meaning, but we can only apply meaning through our culture, and we only apply meaning through based on story of what that meaning is. So if all of us, it's the same internally though, not just objects. And so if all of a sudden I have a sensation or a feeling, I will put my cultural associations onto that sensation and apply meaning, and it will largely dictate how I'm actually experiencing what I'm experiencing.
Wow. Yeah. And I feel like that's how um, manipulation works, right? I feel like big pharma, when it comes to the way that they medicalize everything, I think they very consciously do what you're talking about there, right? Which is where they work very hard to alter the cultural beliefs so that when people feel certain things, they then experience it as a medical issue, right?
Yeah.
Um, but to speak to what you've just talked about there, I've heard from a lot, and I mean a lot. I couldn't put a number on it, but a lot of particularly women that get into abusive relationships where they are abused by their partner who tells them that they're crazy. They go and get a diagnosis as a result because obviously they're stuck in the abuse cycle. And then when they finally do manage to flee the abuse, they realize, oh, I know I don't have this
Yeah.
diagnosis that I've gone and got myself. So they may stop taking the medication or go back against the diagnosis, and then they will have that used against them in court by the person that abused them, who says, well, look, they were, they had clinical depression and they're not taking their medication, so they're the crazy one. So you can see how that cycle then just
Are the
becomes like
courts allowing
perpetuate.
that? Because in Canada, you're not allowed to be discriminated.
Yeah, no, here you can talk about that. I'm pretty sure I've been told by people that that's what's
Wow. Yeah,
happening.
they allow that to be as though it's evidence. Yeah.
Mm.
No, I'm asking. So that's interesting.
I don't. This is what I've been told by people, right?
Yeah.
By I'm just relaying like a generalization of people's experiences, but
Well, and the thing is even if you're not legally allowed to have that be evidence, it still affects people subconsciously on the beliefs, and then it tarnishes the lens they have towards that person. And now they're
yeah,
bound in this fetch or this perspective, and they can't get out of
mm,
it no matter what they do. So it
mm,
almost, because we have that confirmation bias within us. So if the people are, having a lens that's, oh, this person's just unfit or unwell or unhinged or whatever that judgment is, they're going to look for it. And even if they have, that person is just saying, hey, no, that's not, and they're unhinged, and now
yeah. There you
they
go.
don't validate anything that they say.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
yeah,
awful for sure.
yeah.
That's
And that's historically happened to women, right? Post-war, women were
Oh
labeled
yeah,
as
oh yeah,
hysterical when they were picking up all of the,
yeah. Well,
all
and look
fallout
at
from the war.
the word lunacy, right? And so, luna means moon, right? And so
Mm,
women who would be kind of uninhibited dancing like pagans, right? Like that, it goes back to that judgment from the church and demonizing anyone who isn't of the church and of that stoic standard. And so, people who are wild, free, and expressive, they would seek very heavily to suppress them. And I like to
mm.
use the plant metaphor because it really helps, shift that paradigm. And so, my dog's so cute, so I was just looking at distracting me. But the plant metaphor, if we see a plant not doing well, do we blame the plant? No, we say,
Yeah.
well, it hasn't been cared for. It needs to be watered. It's having a totally natural response to the fact that it's not getting its needs met. And every plant might have different needs, just like every human might have different needs. I see a plant
Mm.
going by right now. That's really funny. So, anyways,
How is that? What? Yeah, I saw the plant going by. It looks like it's moving past the window. How is that even happening?
the well, there's a pool out there, and then like landscapers are, I guess, putting new
Oh, okay.
plants in.
That's crazy.
There
Yeah.
was a plant not doing well. They chose to put spruce trees in, and it's a brand new building, so they realized the spruce trees can't actually thrive here in these conditions, which is natural. So they are putting new ones in that can thrive in these particular conditions in the Okanagan. So yeah, I mean that's just so fitting for what I was just saying.
Yeah, it is. There's I don't know if you've ever seen it. There's a meme that I've seen of it's like a forest, but it's all been cut down. This is just a drawing, and there's a koala bear that's like hanging on to a tree that's been cut down, and the forest is completely gone, and this koala is drawn to look like it's crazy. and there's a
Right.
doctor stood next to it, pointing at it, going, "I think this koala bear's got a mental health problem."
Right.
And it's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know what I mean? And that's what we're doing
Yeah. So
to
if you look
society.
at marketing, marketing in and of itself is quite psychologically manipulative. Like
Yeah.
if your standard marketer said, "Oh, I did it really successfully," you mean you coerced really successfully to get the
Yeah.
sale. And usually, right, there's also heart-centered, beautiful, kind of people that are like, "Would you like to come in and and see what I have to offer?" But they're not going to be as successful in this capitalistic world, right?
Mm,
And so when you're coerced, it's important to look at the fact that pharmaceutical companies are companies. So they did it really well. They said, "Hey, this is what we have to offer. This is probably what you're going through. Buy it. You're going to want it." And so
yeah.
they have done it. They've been successful in what they set out to
Yeah.
do.
And we should always be, and I challenge everybody to question those things, because these are multi-billion pound industries, right? They have spent millions and billions of pounds on fines for when they have been caught out. But ultimately, if my job is to sell more antidepressants, quote unquote, but I feel like everybody that needs them's got them, but I'm told I need to sell more, the next thing I'm going to do is to try and need to convince more people that they
Yeah.
need them.
Yeah.
And so, like you say, marketing then
Yeah.
means I need to convince you that you've got a problem before I can sell you what the fix.
Yeah.
So the solution to them who are trying to make more money is to convince more people that they have a need for antidepressants. Ultimately, convince them that there's something wrong with them.
Yeah. And they've done it because 50% of
Yeah,
people are on antidepressants.
yeah, yeah. And this is why I say to people, even the reason I put antidepressant in quote marks is because these tablets are not called antidepressants. They're called fluoxetine or whatever they're called, right? Fluoxetine is fucking antibiotic, I think, but they're called technical names. But the pharmaceutical companies have called them antidepressants because it sounds like they are tackling depression in the same way an antibiotic
Right.
tackles an infection, but they are not the same at all. An antibiotic is nothing like an
That's
antidepressant.
so smart of you to make that contrast.
Yeah.
So I guess we could bring it back to the plant metaphor. So if you think about a plant that's wilted, I guess there would be like a depression. Maybe you could interpret it as a depression if your leaves were wilted, but you don't actually get to see it. Although you could have some telltale signs, right? You can kind of
Mm,
see maybe the coloring is kind of gone a bit on, there isn't that joyous spirit, that it's really wilted. But if you look at what the innate needs of any human being are those needs being met? And
mm,
the impacts of mental abuse are so substantial, and I would say that that's very connected to depression. And when you look at, oh, I'm not in that environment anymore, I don't have people criticizing me or giving me those kind of negative feedback loops on my identity and my being itself anymore. Well, those tracks maintain, right, even when we're on our
mm,
own. So like those this is where spiritual healing is so important, I think, because it helps to release some of how bound that can be. And that can be emotional freedom techniques too, if you want it a little bit more Western, or EMDR, all of those things. I think it's a combination. And medication can be there if it works for some people. In the meantime, it should be complementary. It's not the
mm,
it's not the thing that's going to help. So it's not all or nothing. I don't think it should be us or them anymore. We need an integrative approach that's like what's truly going to work for someone. And you're right, like on antidepressants, it says, oh, you might have thoughts of suicide. Well, how is it an antidepressant then if you also could get these other symptoms? But back to the plant metaphor. So what nourishment do you need? What would water be to you? What would sun be to you? How would you get deep roots? What's needed for that? And then thinking about those who maybe due to their real circumstances, that might be even more hard. So then validating them for that, maybe you don't feel you have that opportunity to get what deep roots would be because of your economic circumstances. But
Yeah.
then, that's putting it back on our those who decide things for our social structures.
Yeah. That's like the big thing again, is like um part of the needs that you're talking about could be that um and this would be true for me, that you've built your whole sort of community around you. Your whole social system is built around the quote unquote dodgy wiring, right?
Mm,
So I've got all the people around me that fit my kind of traumatized nervous system. So
mm,
part of my healing was actually, I thought I can't feel safe with anybody. But actually, one of the big problems is that I was surrounded by people that didn't make me safe.
mm-hmm,
And so part of my healing has to been to get a new community and go, oh, actually, I wasn't broken. It wasn't that I couldn't feel safe with people. It's that I was with the wrong fucking people. And now I'm around these people that make me feel safe, right? I realize I can feel safe. I just have to be around nervous systems that kind of
yes,
match mine, right? And this is why I do think that attachment theories can be problematic, because we can go, oh, I've got an anxious attachment system, but then we just stick with that. So then we just go, we keep picking the same type of people
yeah,
that feed that narrative, rather than actually going and finding someone new and going, actually, when I'm with the right person who makes me feel safe, all of these relational problems that I thought I had actually start to dissipate and disappear. And I realize it wasn't me that was the problem. It was what I was, surrounding myself with as a result of the experiences that I had. So that's why I think community becomes so important, going out and finding new community. Does that make sense?
no, absolutely. We're co-regulative, right, beings. We can't
Yeah.
deny that. We can't get away from that. We can't try to have positive mantras so much that we're like, no, even if I'm in a toxic environment, I can be well. No, we
Yeah.
co-regulate. And even
Mm,
so much so, if you look at a petri dish analogy, right, if we were to see really dysregulated, chaotic microorganisms in this petri dish and you put in a regulated organism, they would get dysregulated, right? But
mm,
the opposite is also true. So if you have a really regulated petri dish, like very regulated organisms, they aren't chaotic, they aren't stressed out. They're just they're really functioning, right? And then you put in a dysregulated organism, they would become regulated.
mm.
But this is the vision I always have. And but where would we place, dysregulated people into that's actually a really regulated society, where then that can be possible? Or this is also why when people go to detox or rehabilitation centers or other spaces and they do really well at programs, then they go back to that dysregulated environment and they will become dysregulated again.
Yeah. I think we're seeing a lot of that with what I might call retreat culture as well, which is people are now obsessed with going to retreats because it's the only place they can feel regulated. Because once they go back into the normal fucking system, they just
Yeah,
dysregulate again.
yeah.
And then, but now there's this like push to say, of talk of like integration and stuff, and I understand that,
Mhm.
but actually, really, probably what's going on is you're just going back into that same shit environment. So of course, it's like dysregulating you again. And so until we change,
Yeah,
and this is what my work is remains to be about. It's like, we're fighting a bit of a losing battle until we really push to change the structures
yeah,
above us, so that when you leave that retreat, you go back into a system that is more regulated, and you've got a better chance of fucking any kind of like integration, bringing in some of that stuff that you've learned. But I do feel like, and I wonder what you think about this, that sometimes like the self-development healing space has sort of become a little bit individualistic. It's sort of
mhm.
become like it's all on you, and if you don't feel regulated, you're not doing the right work, you're not doing it well enough. And I just think, I don't know if that's the case. I just think we're living in such a fucked up culture.
Yes and yes and yes. So the post integration stuff, that's kind of treating the smoke too, because it's like, okay, to respond to the fact that we have an unwell society, this is now this, we still have to mitigate the results of that rather than actually treat it, just like you said. I think a key
Mm,
point here is this idea of intensity in the nervous system. Obviously, intensity due to a huge traumatic event is different than intensity that's like excitation, or what we would mentally deem exciting. It's our construct towards the event that makes our nervous system store what it actually is. But intensity is intensity. It doesn't go
mm,
good or bad. Intensity is intensity. So what I often see is people who have had really, traumatic childhoods, and or they're just pushing. They have this belief system, this workaholism. Maybe they came from an alcoholic families and dysfunction. They don't believe good things about themselves. They don't know that they're worthy of beautiful, co-regulative, healthy humans to be in their life. They don't know they're worthy of that, right? Or when they do have that, they feel a mirror that they don't know what to do with, right? So a healthy,
mm,
loving, attuned person might actually make people realize that they have a lot to work on and they're not ready. They don't feel ready. But when it comes to your wellness retreats, kind of addiction, they keep chasing that intensity. They're still matching intensity from what they've been through. And so the nervous system actually needs to reattune and to balance to homeostasis to
mm,
come. And so it's a huge avoidance culture too, because if I just keep matching intensity, I'm not actually here and really feeling
mm,
what I need to, what I'm trying to avoid. And so it just becomes another issue. And, I've seen people go and do ayahuasca, and at first you can see it's really clicked for them and they're integrating. But then they want more and more and more, and now they've digressed and they're not doing well at all. Or
mm.
other lichen things. There's so much out there, and I think that it shouldn't be a fad. Things should be connected to, because it's actually meaningful. And if it's another superiority complex thing where, oh, well, I saw a jaguar when I meditated, or, whatever that is, comparing one another to each other, then we're not coming back to those human-centered values and where we actually want to go towards. But we will get there eventually, because people will crash and burn eventually in their nervous system and realize, I'm not actually well doing this still. I think people are craving authenticity now more than ever,
Yeah.
but not really quite sure where to find it, or they still come to those spaces that maybe have it and carry that mask still. And so these spaces where you can just be real are really important, because the mask isn't helping us. It's not letting us be with what is. And if we're not with what is, we're kind of disassociating. And so even that spiritual community of healing can be a disassociative space.
Oh, definitely. And I see and feel that regularly in some of the spaces that I'm in. And I look at my own journey and I feel like this, if I had what in the recovery space they call the rock bottom that led me to getting sober, the second rock bottom that I had within that sobriety was the most important one, because that's where I went, what I'm doing is not right still, and I need to actually look further, And today in my life, I feel like I'm most excited when I realize that I'm wrong about something, because that's when I know the next like real run of healing is coming. You know what I mean?
So you're open, curious, and connected, which is that healthy way of being we want to be. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. Look, I'm conscious of time. And I did want to get on to talking about some of the things that you're doing in the world today that can really help
Oh,
people in the spaces that they're in. Can you talk about some of them?
oh, sure. Okay, so for folks that are just kind of new to a healing journey, or what that might even be, I've got music out there. I have my album Feel It to Heal It. It kind of takes you on a little bit of a journey with some nervous system reset kind of music too. And then my second album, Sacred Rebirth, kind of came as an EP after that. So you can find all of that on Spotify or Bandcamp or wherever. Just put my
Oh
name
wow.
in and music. So that's kind of an offering. And then I have a free school community on Skool, Skool. I don't know if it's popular in the UK or not, but it's really a community so people can heal, or those that are really wanting to lead and have that social change. It's also a space where they can get really important kind of courses towards being more trauma informed as well in the offerings that they're giving. And so
Wow.
there's a free course on there. And then there's, my website, simplysacred.ca, also has a lot of free resources about healing. And then I can do consultations with people and to see and map with their inner child healing and what that might look like for them as well. And so that's also an option.
Amazing. It sounds like you're doing some like incredible stuff in the world at the moment. What's next for you?
Well, I'm finishing a board game on social equity because, like I said, that really came out huge. Was that healthiness in a society is based on equity. So that board game's almost done, and actually, I'm
Board game. So you're making a board game that we can buy and play, right?
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm actually meeting with the Health Innovation Center right after this call about they really want to help me levitate it. I don't know if that's the word, but let's go with it. Levitate
Elevate.
it.
Levitate is like when you float, isn't it?
But yeah, and then I'm really excited about the board game because the expansion pack. So we could do a UK expansion pack and really have the particularities of each group so that it can be applied and thought out, and we can make a new paradigm. Because the Monopoly board game actually impacted social theory. I don't know if you know that, but we conceptualized a lot of our capitalistic values based on a board game. And so I would say we're at that stage of Monopoly where no one can move and we just need to restart, but we actually need a new game.
Wow.
That's my next.
That's amazing. I can't wait. I want to play the board game when it comes out. So you believe, sorry, I've got to ask this now. You believe that like underpinning the solution that we need is more equity. So it's the distance between the top rich people in society and the most poor in society is at the center of the struggles.
I do believe that social equity and health equity is the center point because people aren't able to access what's truly going to allow for healing if our whole agenda is, supplementing the needs of the 1% for sure.
Yeah, and then because then what happens is as well is the people lower down, we're like they're all just told you can be like the 1% if you work hard enough, which we know is just completely ridiculous and not true.
Right. And you're enough as you are. You matter as you are. You are sacred as you are. You don't need to be this narrative that's been kind of spoon-fed for generations. You don't need to actually uphold that status quo to be enough. You already are enough. So if the nervous system relaxes knowing that you are sacred and enough just being who you are, then there's going to be a lot more healthy kind of feedback loops internally. Because our thoughts actually create a protein enzyme. So if we're thinking I'm not enough, I'm never going to be enough in this space, that person's this other social status, or they've got the 2 cars, or those kinds of things, and I don't, which is what they found in the Roseto effect was so effective, was that nobody would act like that. They wouldn't get a nicer car because they didn't want their neighbor to feel bad. That was actually what was happening in that community, and you can look up Roseto effect. And yeah, it's powerful. And so how can we apply that research and that knowing that health researchers have found actually into our social fabric? And so I'm putting those kind of principles in the game. And I'm going to have reciprocoins because reciprocity is so key. And it's such a paramount indigenous value system and value systems from many cultures that have had wellness threaded throughout is that reciprocity. Not for individual gain, but reciprocity. Yeah. So that's a teaser about what's in the game, reciprocoins.
When do you think that's going to be ready?
Oh, well, I have a goal for the new year for sure. My game designer is pretty awesome, and he's on it. We're just you have to fine tune the gameplay to see what's really fun. You have to actually do a whole bunch of stuff like that, and then I do want it to ensure that the equity researchers also look at it, and so we can get it the best that it can be before it's launched. But I'll let you know.
Amazing. Yeah, well, when it's ready, I'd love to like share it and see if I can get my hands on it and stuff like that. It'd be amazing.
Yeah.
Listen, this has been amazing. I've really, really enjoyed this, and I feel like I've learned a lot actually in terms of the conversation that I've had. But before we close down, is there anything that you want to add before we say goodbye that you feel like maybe it's not been said, that's burning, that needs to be said?
Well, I think that we didn't touch on the rat park study, which we were just going to kind of, if it felt natural, and it just came up for me in my mind when you said that. And so I think that looking at love and connection as the solution, and that's been legitimized in health research. We don't need more research to figure it out. We know that love and connection is actually the antidote for social unwellness, for mental health, for addictions, for suicide. And so now what, right? How do we apply that? And let's start thinking about that before, we start talking about what else is possible. So
Yeah, the solutions, love and connection. And, again, in our materialistic society, I fear that those at the top, the policymakers, just go, well, what's love and connection? How do we, how do we fucking use that? You know what I mean? Because it doesn't feel like a commodity, I guess, to them.
So the tangible on the grass movements then can actualize it though, right? And so we can do that in our families. We can do that in loving kindness. There's loving kindness meditations, and it's clinical evidence proven that loving kindness meditations rewire the brain, and that's possible and that's free, right? Yeah. And then when we have loving kindness, or we then start to think about loving kindness even towards people we don't feel loving kindness towards, we also rewire the brain and the nervous system and come to that heart. So those things are available to us to have in our social interactions and our interaction with ourselves. And we can start there, even if we don't have power over what others are choosing, because we don't, right? And so that's part of that grief process of realizing, like, I have power over myself. I have power over what I choose in how I interact with, and I have to accept, release, and allow the fact that I don't have power over what the government chooses, or what the people that decide how the money's spent in our country chooses. I don't have power over that, because that's really heavy to carry. Hey, so releasing that, and continuing. And if you have a grassroots movement that you have already started, you really do. And so if you're feeding that with those valuable, authentic truths and loving connection, you can make an impact. And then you could even have it data driven if you need it. All of a sudden, look at, he's created a mini rat park, right? And in a human way. And so and that's really valuable. And then they'll go, okay, why is it effective? And then you go up and you talk about why it's effective, and that can create social change.
Real change. Yeah. Amazing. Listen, I want to thank you very much. I'm actually a little bit disappointed I didn't have more time. Because I could have carried on for a bit, but such is the way it is. Maybe we'll get you back for part 2. I definitely feel like there's a few guests that I'd like to do that with. It's almost, I feel like we start the exploration on this one and then we'd need to go again. So maybe we'll look at that. But thank you very much. I can't wait to share this with everybody, and I just appreciate your time. Thank you. I did tell you it would be dysfunctional, so thank you for sticking around till the end here. And if you have enjoyed this podcast, then please help me to grow Dysfunctional by sharing with your friends on social media. You can find me at Josh_FFW. And then wherever you're listening to this or watching this, please make sure that you've liked and subscribed, left us a 5-star review and a comment if your platform allows it. And I'll see you on the next one.